I'll grab it and I'll talk to you. Oh. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
That was very loud, louder than I anticipated. It's just as though I hadn't been on this bima several times. It's wonderful to see all of you here this evening. That's always true, but I think it's especially true on challenging Shabbatot. So I'm so glad you're here to join us and to welcome Shabbat with us. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught us, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the essential thing is not to be afraid. For many of us, I think that advice has been a little harder to follow than usual in the last week. We come into this Shabbat carrying the weight of quite a bit of very painful news from Israel, both the return of the remains of 4 Israeli hostages taken by Hamas, including 2 young children, and the bombing of 3 buses in Bat Yam, in which thankfully no one was hurt. Nevertheless, I think these events have elicited fear, anger, and sadness in many of us, on top of any other challenges we may be facing personally or as a society. But that's precisely why it is so important for us to come together for Shabbat, because Shabbat is our sanctuary. It's a sacred time to pause, reflect, and restore ourselves in community. Tonight, we also turn our hearts and minds to an issue of pressing ethical, urgent, and central import to human dignity, reproductive freedom, including access to abortion. The National Council of Jewish Women has designated this as Repro Shabbat, an occasion for affirming our commitment to upholding reproductive rights and standing in solidarity with those who seek reproductive care. Our tradition recognizes the importance of reproductive decision-making, balancing the sanctity of life with the imperative to protect autonomy and well-being. I'm going to return to these ideas a little bit later on in the drash portion of our service, where I will also explain why this is Repro Shabbat and who has designated it as such in a little more detail. But for now, I'd like to invite everyone to take a deep breath and step into the sacred rhythm of Shabbat. And may this time bring us clarity, strength, and a renewed commitment to compassion and justice. We're going to begin our service with Shalom Aleichem, welcoming the angels to come and join us on the Shabbat. You can find Shalom Aleichem on page 24 in your prayer books.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Malachei Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ubekuni l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzechem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Having welcomed the angels into our midst, we're also going to invite some extra light to signify our joy and our celebration on the Shabbat. So I'd love to invite up Ron and Susie Miller to please join me on the bima to light our Shabbat candles. You can turn to page 2 and 3 in your prayer books. We'll do a reading first from page 3, and then the blessing can be found on page 2.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and light if you want.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam,
Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu achalik ner shel Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lechadlik ner shel Shabbat. Lechadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
We welcome not only this beautiful light and the angels, but also Shabbat itself to come and join us. We imagine Shabbat as our beloved who comes to meet us once every week and to bring us more joy and more peace than we sometimes enjoy during the week. So we will turn now to pages 20 and 21 in our prayer books to sing Lecha Dodi, in which we encourage one another to welcome Shabbat. We will sing a few verses. When we come to the last verse, Bo'ī v'Shalom, I would invite you to rise and face the entrance. Please turn to pages 20 and 21.
Lecha Dodi, likrat tala, b'nei Shabbat, nikabla, אמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, ישמיעאל יום מיוחד, אדוני אחד, אלוהינו אחד, לשם ותפארת והתהילה. לך דודי לקראת תלה, פני שבת נקבלה, התעוררי, כי באורך ומאורי, אורי שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת תלה, פני שבת נקבלה, בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה וצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת תלה, פני שבת נקבלה, לך דודי לקראת תלה, שמור תהיה קבלה. לך דודי לקראת תלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
We continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish, transitioning from welcoming Shabbat into our evening service. You can find the Chatzi Kaddish on page 26.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה,
אמן.
בימת יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי לקודשה בריחו, לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן ביעלמה ויאמרו Amen.
We now rise for the call to prayer, the Barchu on page 28.
Yai la 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Yai la 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 yai la 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 la. La 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 la. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. Adonai
turn to page 30 and 31, and we read together from the top of page 31. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. Whenever we sing Ahavat Olam, we remind ourselves that God shows God's love for us through the kind of loving care a parent might show, through giving us rules and instructions to live life in a good and ethical and joyous way. So please join us in celebrating God's love as given in the Torah on page 32 in our prayer books with Ahavat Olam.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amecha Avta, Amcha Avta, Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu limadeta, Otanu limadeta. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shochbenu, Ukumenu na'asiach bechukecha, V'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, Uv'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Ki hem chayenu ve'orek yameinu, Uvahem nege yomam v'layla, nege yomam v'layla. Ve'ahavach al tasir, imenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev amo Yisrael, Ohev amo Yisrael.
We continue with our prayer, praising God and God's oneness, the Shema on page 34.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed.
Please be seated as we continue with Ve'ahavta on page 36.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lavavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadavarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavacha hayom alevavecha Vishinantam livanecha, vidibarta bam, beshivtecha bevetecha, uvlechtecha vaderech, uvshochbecha ukumecha, ukshartam leot al yadecha, vehayula totafot beinenecha, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Adonai Elohechem emet. We turn now to page 41, where we join together in reading the English. Sing the song of men and women joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, the song of peace. We sing that song on page 40 in our prayer books, Mi Chamocha.
Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai 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 lai 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 lai. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilo rosei feleh, nora tehilo rosei feleh. Malechutecha ra'u vanecha, bokei ayam lifnei Moshe, ze Elianu ve'amru, ze Elianu ve'amaru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
We turn to page 43, and we read together at the top of the page. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporeis sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. As we observe Shabbat, we also celebrate observing Shabbat with V'shamru, where we remind ourselves that it is a covenant for all time between us and God to take this sacred moment to pause, to take a break from our regular lives, and to be with one another. So please join us on page 44 for V'shamru.
V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, v'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Beni uvein b'nei Yisrael Sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim et haaretz uvayom hashebi Shabbat vayinachash. A thought has blown the marketplace away.
There's a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat arrives in the world, scattering a song in the silence of the night. Eternity utters a day. We now rise once more as able and join together in the Amidah, beginning on page 46 with Adonai Sefatai.
Adonai Sefatai tivtachu fi hagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibur v'Hanorah El Elyon Gomel chasadim tovim, v'konei ha'akol, v'zocher chazdei avot va'imahot, umevi gula livnei v'neihem, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהלוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
You may be seated. We continue at the top of page 55, reading together. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai mikadesh hashabbat. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu ba'amcha Yisrael utfilatam be'ahava tikabel. We read together the English at the top of page 57. Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer. Wherever we live, wherever we seek you, in this land, in Zion restored, in all lands, you are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence. Baruch atah Adonai, shorcha levadcha b'yirah na'avod. I'll take this moment now, as I like to do, to give everyone the opportunity to think of some specific things for which you are grateful on this Shabbat before we say our prayer of gratitude. Could be small things, could be big things, but think of a few things for which you are specifically grateful on this Shabbat. That's a very nice one. Does anyone else have one they want to share? You don't have to. Well, that is excellent, thank you. And in honor of that, let's read together at the bottom of page 58 where it says, "For all these things." For all these things, O Sovereign, let your name be forever praised and blessed. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who live affirm you and praise your name in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai. Your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lehodot. We pray many times for peace on Shabbat, during the week, at all times. We know that peace is an essential quality for us to feel inside so that we can then project it and build it out into the world. So please join us in a prayer of peace on page 60, Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata Melech Adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata Melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov be'einecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
Every time we gather for Shabbat, we take the opportunity to pray for the healing and the well-being of all those in our community who are suffering. On this Shabbat, as we sing Mishaberach together, which you can find on page 253 in your prayer books, we hold in our hearts all those who are suffering due to restrictions on access to reproductive care and abortion. We also think of the loved ones of all those still being held captive in Gaza, as well as the family and loved ones of Oded Lifshitz and of the Bibas family, whose suffering continues as they mourn the return of Ariel and Kfir's remains and yet await confirmation of the fate of their mother, Shiri. In addition, on this Shabbat, we pray for the following members of our Shalom community. We pray for Steve Teplinsky, Esther Cohen, Olivia Jane, Linnea Katz-Petted, Friedland Veal, Luca Eisenberg, Carol Miller, Shulamit Shira Bat Gittel Yehudit, Jahari Andre King, Fern Drescher, Bruce Sherman, Ezra Kramer, Jane Zeft, William Gleason, Jeff Zemmel, Wendy Pollack, John Holz, Gershon ben Avraham, Danielle ben Bruria, Keith Mandel, Carolyn Newman, Kelly Adeniak, Carol Rort Trainer, George Grimm, Patrick Heppy, Gary Elderbrook, Aryeh ben Yosef and Miriam, Dr. Joyce Sanchez, Alan Paley, Mary Jo Werner, Eleanor Varga, Lisa Putterman, Zachariah Yitzchak ben Sima Pesha, the Wallert and Drankowitz family, Stuart Willis, Scott McLean, and Wendy Schuster. And if there's anyone else for whom you are praying for healing on this Shabbat, I invite you to hold their names in your hearts as we join together on page 253 for Mi Sheberach.
Mi Sheberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi Sheberach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lehavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. We take a moment now for silent prayer. Say shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Say shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, amen, amen. Oh, say shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Ve'al kol Yisrael, amen.
I'm curious on this Shabbat as to how many folks knew coming into it that it was Repro Shabbat. So if you did know, please raise your hand. Okay, so, interesting, mostly this side of the room. I'm also curious how many people know what Repro Shabbat is, in addition to knowing that it's Repro Shabbat. Okay, not as many. And does anyone know why this specific Shabbat is Repro Shabbat? Ah, good, then I picked the right thing to talk about. So this Shabbat is not chosen by happenstance. There is actually a specific reason that it is Repro Shabbat this week. I'll back up a little bit and say that there is an organization that I hope you've heard of called the National Council of Jewish Women, the NCJW. They do tons of amazing work. My mother served as an officer, I think, at one point in Seattle. Big fan of the NCJW. And one of the things that they do is they have designated this Shabbat as Repro repro Shabbat, as a Shabbat for Reform Jews, liberal Jews, really any Jews who wish to participate to affirm our commitment to reproductive choice. And the reason that it is this week is because this week's Torah portion is Parashat Mishpatim. And in Parashat Mishpatim, we find the Israelites at the foot of Sinai. We find Moses in the process of receiving the commandments. Many, many commandments are given in Mishpatim. In fact, the word Mishpatim means laws or judgments. So we're getting lots and lots of laws. And one of them in particular drew the attention of subsequent commentators who built an entire philosophy of reproductive choice off of that verse. So if you have the handout that we were passing around at the beginning, you can refer to that. If you don't, there should be some more copies in the back where the talitot and the kippot are if you want to grab one. And I'm just going to start out by reading the first couple of sources and explaining why these are the cause of this being repro Shabbat. And generally speaking, what I want to do this evening is just give you a little bit of information about some of Jewish tradition's key texts having to do with abortion and with other reproductive questions, mostly having to do with abortion. I think the thing that not everybody realizes is that our ancient texts actually address that topic quite a bit. And there is quite a rich discourse about it in ancient Judaism as well as in contemporary Judaism. So these first two passages from Exodus, these are kind of the key texts. The first is one of multiple places in the Torah in which we are told that homicide is punishable by death. So we read in Exodus 21:12, "One who fatally strikes another party shall be put to death." Or literally, one who strikes a man and he dies shall surely be put to death. Sometimes when it specifically says man in the Torah, the rabbis and later tradition think that it's about men, and sometimes they think it's about everybody. This is one we're pretty sure is about everybody. So if you fatally strike a person, it is homicide, and the biblical punishment is death. Now, I should say the post-biblical punishment was usually not death. One of the things that the rabbis do in the Talmud, for instance, is debate at great length whether we should really be putting people to death, and if so, how often. And there's a saying in the Talmud you may have heard that a Sanhedrin that condemns one person to death every 7 years or even every 70 years is a bloody Sanhedrin. So we know that there's some interest in later parts of the tradition in mitigating that, but that is supposed to be, biblically, the punishment. And then we get to Exodus 21:22-25, and that's the second source on your sheet. "When two or more parties fight, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life." So I have a wandering mic up here that I can offer to anybody who would like to give a try to responding. If, check, nope. I thought I had it on. Hello, check. All right, take two. Check. Oh, that's on. Okay. I have a wandering mic, and I wonder if anybody has intuitively sussed out why it is that second verse is so important. And if you think you have and you want to share with us, please raise your hand. And if not, I'll explain. It wasn't an entirely fair question. There will be better questions that you can actually answer if you'd like. So here's the answer. One would expect that if killing a fetus were considered an act of homicide, that the punishment would be death. It is not considered an act of homicide, evidently, because that is not the punishment. That is the conclusion that pretty much all subsequent Jewish thinkers draw from this text, that there may be some kind of concern involved in the death of a fetus, but it's not the same as the death of a human being. If it were, the punishment would be logically the same. So from this, we infer that abortion is not an act of homicide, according to even quite ancient and strict Jewish tradition. And then we also have a couple more teachings that I have on that first page. One of them is a very brief one in which Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi holds that a fetus is considered as its mother's thigh. And that is often sort of more loosely translated as the fetus is considered to be a limb or a part of the mother. So that is also a teaching that brings a lot of bearing on Jewish thought about abortion. It is in the context of a debate about something utterly unrelated. It's to do with, if you emancipate your slave, do you also emancipate your fetus, I think, which that's a whole other can of worms. But it's still a text that is often cited when people discuss these questions. And then the last text on this first page, by the way, the text I just read, Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi in Bava Kama, that is from the Talmud. And so is this next text. It's from the Mishnah in Arachin. This one is interesting. In the case of a pregnant woman who is taken by the court to be executed, the court does not wait to execute her until she gives birth. Rather, she is killed immediately. But with regard to a woman taken to be executed who sat on the travailing chair in the throes of labor, the court waits to execute her until she gives birth. I imagine people might have all manner of thoughts and feelings about this particular passage, but what it does suggest is some alignment with the ones we read before. It suggests the idea that while a fetal life is important, it is not considered to be a homicide if one kills a fetus, and therefore one considers that life differently. Is there anybody either who is very surprised by all of this, or unsurprised, or has a thought or a question they'd like to share at this point? Are any of these texts familiar to people? Raise your hand if any of these texts are familiar to you. Okay, a little bit, but not a whole lot. So does anyone have a thought they'd like to share? Ah, great, we have somebody in the back there. If, on the back right, the other, yeah. Well, if you want to shout, you can shout and I can repeat what you said so everyone else knows what it was.
I'm surprised that the second passage with Exodus does not, to me, equal up to what we just talked about, because what I was left with on the second one was, doesn't it depend on how far along the pregnancy is? So to me, when we're talking about abortion, and it's not considered a murder or the same thing as killing someone else, but yet you get to the last one and they wait, if the woman is in the throes of labor or close to labor, this is where it all gets super fuzzy and gray, correct?
It does, except it gets less gray with the next text. So you're anticipating correctly that there are questions to ask about this, and that we will get into a little bit further in just a moment. The critical thing here is once the birth process starts, there's a lot more discomfort with interrupting the birth process. There's a notion that once it's begun, it should finish. Anything up to that, though, is still considered within the first section of that text from Mishnah Arachin, right? The section of we do not wait to execute. But actually, with that question, maybe we should go on to the next source on the next page. These are a couple of sources about when does a fetus become or when does it gain a soul. Jewish tradition understands there to be some intangible part of the human spirit that lasts beyond our physical existence. And the question is a fetus endowed with that spirit or not? And interestingly, there are at least these two sources that directly contradict each other about this question, which it wouldn't be Judaism if we didn't have at least a couple of directly contradicting sources. So the first one is from the Mishnah again, and it states, and this is a little graphic, if a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the fetus in her womb and bring it forth limb by limb because her life comes before its life. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one nefesh or soul for another. This is the source of a Jewish teaching you may have heard, that a person does not truly have a soul until they breathe their first breath. And the word nephesh, meaning soul, it's one of 3 words we use to mean soul, has connotations of breath and breathing. So there's this idea that without breathing, there isn't this spirit, right? So that is what this first text is asserting, which I think clears up anything that was ambiguous about the previous one, or if it doesn't, please tell me. The next one is interesting because it really stands in contradiction to that one. And this is another, all of these passages are from the Talmud. Just to say briefly, the Talmud is a set of books from about 1,500 years ago. They were put together around sayings from about 0 to 500 CE, a record of the rabbis' conversations about everything to do with Jewish living, Jewish ethics, Jewish law. We sometimes say that it's a commentary on the Torah or that it's a law code. It's really more than that. There are folk tales, there are asides of all kinds, and it really explores every aspect of Jewish life. And it is also where a lot of our most beloved traditions come from. So in a few weeks, crazily, we will be celebrating Passover. We will be remembering that critical moment in our people's history. And the idea of having a Passover Seder is one that we get from the Talmud. They do not exist before the rabbis of the Talmud. So the Talmud is really a crucial document for us. Yes, please. I think the mic is coming your way.
The rabbis, a fetus is not breathing?
According to the rabbis, a fetus is not breathing air the way that you and I breathe air. I know that it is respiring because it's doing that within the context of the mother. Sorry, go ahead.
How did they come to that opinion?
How did they come to that opinion?
How do they know that?
Because I think they know that the fetus is inside a uterus that is filled with liquid, and that the fetus is getting all its nourishment through the umbilical cord,
No oxygen? No oxygen?
So this is interesting. I am now going to admit my ignorance. I don't exactly know from whence a fetus absorbs oxygen. Is it not through the umbilical cord? I don't know, because the fetus is totally submerged in liquid, right? So does anybody know this? Please. It is through the umbilical cord? Okay. So it's not breathing the way that you and I breathe. That's what they understand.
That's an opinion.
I'm not sure that is an opinion. I think it's hard if your mouth is full of liquid. It's hard to breathe the way you and I might breathe. I think it's an opinion whether that's important or not for this purpose. That is certainly up for debate. Yes, please, Ben, go ahead.
Rabbi, I'm just curious how, with the advent, especially in the last 30 years of technology that shows us and tells us a lot more what's going on inside the fetus in the womb and everything from heartbeat to reactions, how do we take the technological advancements and put them with the historical document you're talking to us about?
That's a great question. And there are lots of answers. Certainly, there are Jewish thinkers from all across the ideological spectrum who have written a great deal about contemporary technology and how it intersects with Jewish tradition and what it says about how we might approach various kinds of medical and health decisions. I have not seen a whole lot of rejection of any of these original principles. Mostly what Jews tend to do is figure out how to apply them in the contemporary context, and I have seen them applied in a variety of different ways. After we look at these sources a little bit, I'll kind of wrap up by giving you sort of my take, but it's just my take. So the best answer I can give you to that is there's a lot written about this, and I'm not expert in it and couldn't possibly sum it up, so you should definitely go read some of it. There's really good stuff. Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's an evolving process. This is one of the things that is both challenging and neat about Jewish law, is as we evolve and we become more technologically capable and more sophisticated, it has to evolve with us. The other thing, by the way, is so far what I'm giving you are pretty legalistic takes on these questions. As a Reform Jew, I am in the position of seeing halakha as something that has the power to inform and shape my thinking and my behavior, but doesn't have a hold on me in the same way that it has a hold on an Orthodox Jew. And so I also think and talk about this in terms of values and other kinds of questions. But these texts are so core to even contemporary debates in Judaism about abortion that it felt important for everybody to know what they were. So the next text, I'm actually not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to sort of summarize it. It's a conversation between someone called Antoninos and Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, who we've seen before. He's important because, among other things, he's the editor of the Mishnah. So Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi is a pretty authoritative figure. And he's having a debate with a Greek person who I think shows up a few times in Talmud called Antoninos. And Antoninos asks him when a person gains a soul. And then frames that question as, is it from the moment of conception, or is it from the moment of formation of the embryo, which the rabbis decided was at 40 days after conception? That I don't know if we still hold in exactly the same way, because it's pretty arbitrary. But there is an ancient teaching that literally says, until 40 days, the embryo is essentially just water. That's what the ancient rabbis believed. And so already Antoninos is framing this very differently. He's not saying, is it conception or is it when somebody is born? He's saying, is it conception or is it 40 days? And Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi says, oh, it's from 40 days. And Antoninos says, that doesn't make any sense, because in the same way that flesh will rot if you don't salt it, a person can't persist unless they have a spirit. The spirit is the thing that preserves them. And he seems to win Yehuda Hanassi over. He says, Antoninos taught me this matter. And then he finds a verse that supports him, and he sort of homiletically interprets this verse from Job to mean that the soul appears at the moment of conception. Interestingly, all three words for soul are used across these two texts that we just looked at. The first one has nefesh, and this one has neshama and ruach. So just to underscore that those three words are a little fuzzy, and we often use them sort of interchangeably. But you can see this is a very different position from the position of Mishnah Ohalot, right? Which is essentially, until someone is born, they do not possess a soul in the same way that a born human being does. Is there anybody who wants to mention anything in particular before I go to the last kind of pieces here? We'll see what folks think when we get to the end here. This last text is another text that is seen as being incredibly central. Maimonides cites it, the Shulchan Aruch cites it. The Shulchan Aruch is essentially the arbiter of Jewish law for the traditional world. If you want to know, can I eat this bird, you ask the Shulchan Aruch. Well, you ask your rabbi, but he asks the Shulchan Aruch, right? So this is cited extensively in all kinds of Jewish literature. Rav Huna says, if a minor was pursuing another person in order to kill them, the pursued party may be saved with the pursuer's life. That is very weirdly phrased, but basically what we're saying is, if we have a person and another person is pursuing them to harm them, you are authorized to kill the person who's trying to do the harm in order to protect this person without going through due process. Because normally in Judaism, you have to have a trial, you have to have 3 witnesses, you have to do all kinds of things to establish a person's guilt before you can execute them. But if somebody's life is at stake in the moment, if somebody's being chased, you can kill the chaser in order to protect them. And then, and he goes on to say, there's no difference even between a minor and an adult in this manner. Anybody who's chasing someone to kill them, you can kill that person to protect the first person. And then Rav Chisda brings up the Mishnah from Ohalot. He brings up this idea that a woman who has not yet, it's not the one from Ohalot. It is the one from Ohalot. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself. Once the majority of the child has emerged, at that point, you cannot kill the child. And Rav Chisda says, if that's really true, why? Because you would think you could actually kill the newborn to protect the mother, because the newborn is like a pursuer who's going to cause the mother to die. And the response is, this is different because she's really being pursued by heaven, which is to say, it's not the newborn's fault, right? The newborn is not trying to harm its mother. The newborn is just trying to get born. So once the newborn starts to be born, you do not kill it because you do not choose one soul over another. You let nature sort of take its course. Before that, though, while it's still in the stage where it's inside the mother, then you can do that to protect her. And so from this, we get an enormous body of teachings about what circumstances count as a woman being pursued by a fetus, and those are the circumstances under which Judaism understands abortion to be permissible. And there is a wide spread of opinions about this. Everything from we have to be able to essentially prove that if this fetus comes to term, that the mother will die, and in that case we can abort, to if the mother feels like she's endangered in any way at all by the fetus, including psychologically, monetarily, in any way, then she's authorized to abort. And there's everything in between. So Jewish tradition examines all of those possibilities and discusses them all. So I'm curious, how many people understood Judaism traditionally to permit at least some abortions before tonight? How many people were aware of that previously? And I mean really traditional Judaism, not just Reform and so forth. Right. And then, so that's kind of the thing I wanted people to be aware of. I wanted people to know that there are these ancient texts that give us a lot to chew on and a lot to discuss in terms of what sorts of values and what sorts of issues might come into play when we consider abortion in Judaism. I have a little bit to say in closing, but if anyone else has something that they want to ask or mention before I finish, please feel free. I think we have a hand in the front here, or in the front-ish, because nobody was all that brave in terms of coming to the front tonight, so everybody's all the way in that back half. Please.
I remember that there was always a fear of going to a Catholic hospital to give birth, because the philosophy there was that you save the baby, not the mother.
Yes, and for the most part, the Jewish philosophy is exactly the reverse. You save the mother. The mother's life comes first, and that is something that appears many times in our literature. So yeah, I can understand that anxiety. So I think I want to close by sort of offering my perspective on this. These are some remarks I adapted actually from a piece I wrote for the Jewish Community Relations Council of San Francisco a few years ago. And I start out by saying that we have many Jewish values to draw upon in supporting reproductive choice, in everything from contraception to sex education to abortion. One is Shalom Bayit, peace in the home, which is a principle central to how Judaism views family life. Comprehensive sex education can help to foster healthy, loving relationships, and contraception is often an important part of maintaining harmony in a relationship. Both contraception and sex education are also key elements of self-care, the importance of which Judaism recognizes in the principle of shmirat haguf, or protecting one's body, the mandate to look after one's own physical health. Another Jewish value relevant to reproductive health and choice is kavod habriot, respect for individual dignity. We derive this value in part from the foundational Jewish teaching that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and thereby endowed with both agency and sanctity. A key part of giving dignity to individuals is letting them choose how best to care for themselves, their bodies, and their destinies, including in reproductive matters. And we also, of course, consider the value of rachamim, of compassion. When we approach another person, and even when we approach ourselves, our tradition encourages us to start from a place of compassion, to give great weight to the emotional and spiritual needs of the individual who is before us. But above all, there is the value of pikuach nefesh, saving a life, which is perhaps Judaism's paramount value. Judaism teaches that anyone who saves a nefesh, a living soul, is viewed as having saved an entire world. Accordingly, the Talmud explicitly endorses using contraception in the interest of pikuach nefesh in some cases. A fetus, however, as we've just learned, is widely understood to not yet count as a full nefesh. While there is some dispute about the precise status of a fetus, nearly all Jewish sources agree that it is a different form of life than a person who has fully emerged from the womb. And that much is clear from the biblical discussion we read of the case where a pregnant woman is injured in a struggle between two men and she miscarries. The man who causes this injury has to pay a fine, but is not liable for capital punishment, as in the case of homicide. And we also saw the Mishnah further states that in cases where a pregnant woman's life is in danger, it's not only permissible, but perhaps necessary to destroy the fetus in order to protect her. What exactly constitutes a danger to the mother is, of course, a matter of great dispute. Some would argue that her physical life must be at risk, and many others, myself included, would contend that danger to the mother legitimately extends to her mental and emotional well-being. Now, of course, there are also competing teachings and values that one could bring to bear in this discussion. One is the text I cited earlier, in which Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi contends that every Jewish life is imbued with a soul from the moment of conception. And another would be the biblical commandment, pru or vu, to be fruitful and multiply, which God gave to the very first human beings on the day that they were created, and which some Jews do understand as standing in opposition to both abortion and contraception. But I think, to me, the most important thing is that what I love about Judaism is that it makes room for all of these ideas and for debate about them. Because at the heart of Jewish thought is a deep respect for dialogue and debate and preserving and listening to diverse opinions. And unfortunately, this respect for disagreement and difference is quite lacking in public discourse today, including, I think, in many discussions of reproductive health and choice. So, for my part, I will continue to stand firmly in support of reproductive choice and access to reproductive care, including abortion, while I also recognize that these are morally complex and emotionally provocative issues, and it behooves us to treat them with delicacy and with the nuance that they deserve. Thank you for engaging in this study with me. I hope that these texts will provoke you to further learning, perhaps about the contemporary technological challenges or about any other aspects of this line of Jewish thought. But I appreciate everyone's willingness to go through this process with me, and I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. We're going to turn now in our service to some of our concluding prayers, the first of which is the Aleinu prayer. I would invite you to please rise as able as we turn to page 282 for the prayer in which we remind ourselves and one another that it is Aleinu, it is on us to create the perfected world we wish to see. Page 282.
Vegor aleinu, kekol
You may be seated. As we turn to the Mourner's Kaddish on page 294, we think especially on this Shabbat of Ariel and Kfir Bibas and Oded Lifshitz, whose bodies were returned yesterday, and Shira Bibas, whose remains we hope will be returned soon. We also think of all those whose lives have been cut short due to a lack of access to reproductive care and other forms of health care. We think also of several members of our community. We think for Shaloshim, for the first 30 days of mourning, of Martin Hancock, Goni Lava Monshine, Layla Rosen, and Sharon Rotman. And we also remember a number of yahrzeits on this Shabbat. We remember Fanny Aaron, Nancy Golden Bear, Helen Berger, Chaim Boyam, Alex Cooper, Moritz Dolgan, Molly Fabric, Janet Feigenbaum, Maurice R. Fairstadt, Margot Flamini, Florence S. Frank, Melvin Gilbert, Nancy Golden Bear, Vance Heyman, Shirley Katz, Ben Kelman, Susan Codner, Irvin Ladish, Albert C. Lambert, Sally Lambert, Jack Landisberg, Bertha Liebman, Jules Levin, Leo Lieberman, Simon Lukács, Laura Miller, Hannah Moser, Viola Neus, Manfred Olsner, Ida Katz-Offenhartz, James Pash, Sophie Potashnik, Lillian Price, Sam Price, Nathan Routman, Melvin Shiewitz, Benjamin Gino Siegel, Herman Spiegler, Lorraine Steinman, Joseph Tarlow, Minette Teich, Phyllis Weinberg, Eleanor White, Morris Yanow, Howard Young, and Oliver Zesblatt. And if there are any other names of people for whom you are saying Kaddish this evening, or any names that I should have pronounced differently, please feel free to share that name with me as my eyes go around the room. I now invite us all to rise as able in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish on behalf of all those whom we have named and all those who have none to say Kaddish for them. We join together on page 294. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah, ba'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye chon uvyome chon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'alam u'almei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh v'yit hadar v'yit aleh v'yit halal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace in the heavens help us to create peace with each other here on earth and to comfort one another when we are bereaved. Together we say, Amen. Before we conclude our service, we're going to take a moment for announcements. I would invite you to please be seated. And I will share with you a little bit of what is going on in our community. As always, tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, we will have Torah study at 9 a.m. and a community Shabbat service at 10 a.m. We also have a bar mitzvah tomorrow. It's James Granitz's bar mitzvah tomorrow, yes? So congratulations, James. Please come celebrate if you can. Beginning today and continuing every Friday, thereafter from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. We invite you to join us for coffee or tea at Shalom Schmooze. It's a casual opportunity to be together and share conversation about anything that comes up and build community. So please feel free to come to that. On Thursday, March 6th at 12 p.m., you can bring your own lunch and join Brian or myself or Rabbi Noah for a lunch and learn. That will be on the first Thursday of every month. And on March 6th, we're going to discuss specifically the recent ceasefire in Israel and recent developments in Israel and hopefully the hope of a long-lasting peace. On Friday, March 7th, we have our next community Shabbat dinner at 5:30 p.m. All are welcome, and the services will follow at 6:30 p.m. with some participation from the second grade. On Saturday, March 8th, we will have family movie night, and our film is Trolls Band Together. So please join us for that if you would like. On Thursday, March 13th, we will have Megillah reading at 6 p.m. That's Erev Purim. This is for adults. There will be appropriately adult snacks and beverages, and there will also be hearing the Megillah and discussing it, so please join us for that. And then you are most welcome and encouraged to come in costume. And then on Sunday, March 16th, we will have a Purim Carnival where we'll have a wicked good time. So if you are able to sign up to bake for our cakewalk or to volunteer to help at the carnival, please do. And if you can only come, then just come, and that will be wonderful as well. Starting on Monday, March 17th at 7 p.m., we will be hosting the Milwaukee Hebrew Club. So you can join our community shlicha, Noah Gerasi, for beginner Hebrew sessions through song and Hebrew culture and language games. And of course, please keep looking out for further information about these and our other programs in the foyer, in the shofar, in your emails and Facebook, and the webpage for all of our happenings. Thank you. We hope you'll join us, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
And now we will formally conclude our service with Kiddush, with the prayer over wine with which we sanctify the holiness of Shabbat, and with a closing song. I would invite you to rise one more time as able and turn to page 5 for Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'yahava u'ratzon hinchilanu, zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila l'mikra'e kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'charta, v'yotanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, v'yahava uvratzon, inchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen.
L'chaim. And with what shall we close this evening?
Ma yafeh hayom.
Ma yafeh hayom. How beautiful is this day. The words are just Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat Shalom.
Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Yes. Oh, there's an oneg. Please join us for the oneg in Clearfield Hall, I think. Thank you.